Hey folks, welcome back. It's been a little while. Today's interview is going to be with Eric Gallager. He's a New Hampshire state representative from Concord Ward 6. Known on Blue Sky as New Hampshire's play-by-play guy, he live posts sessions that occur at the State House for easy access for New Hampshire residents to keep up to date with what's happening as it happens in the State House. And without any further ado, here's our interview. First off, just so that we have context, let's just introduce you and who you are and what you do in New Hampshire in the legislature.
So, hi, I am Eric Gallager, the state representative here in Concord for Ward 6. It's Merrimack County, District 20 now, I believe. The district changed numbers over redistricting, but yeah, it's still Ward 6. So it's still the same area, which is so that's the basic downtown core, or the southern half of Main Street. Not quite the neighborhood referred to as the South End. That's more Ward 7, but more of the central part of the city. So yeah, I am one of 400 state legislators, and I live within walking distance of the State House, which is in the Legislative Office Building, where all the committee work happens. So yeah, I head there regularly to go vote on legislation and resolutions and other similar things like that. And one thing I try to make sure to do whenever I'm doing legislative business is to live post the proceedings, so that way people online can get an idea of what exactly is happening. I started off doing that on Twitter, but then Elon Musk bought Twitter and ruined it. So now I primarily do that on Blue Sky.
Understandable.
So, yeah.
Are you on any committees? If so, what committees do you sit on?
So, my first 2 terms, I was on the Municipal and County Government Committee. That's the committee that basically, so I asked when I first got in, which committee do I go on to deal with stuff about housing? Because housing is a pretty important issue for me. And at the time, municipal and county government was, it was actually kind of split into a few separate committees. Municipal and county government was the one for zoning and local regulations affecting housing. Then judiciary is the one for landlord-tenant relations, but also a bunch of other unrelated stuff. And then commerce, again, a bunch of other unrelated stuff, but also occasionally stuff regarding housing materials and the buying and selling procedure. But yeah, most of the housing bills when I first joined the legislature were coming through municipal and county government. So that was my first term. My second term, they created a special committee on housing, which, I supported the creation of. I stayed on municipal and county government though because, the the sign up process for it was a bit inscrutable. So, and then this term, the Special Committee on Housing became a permanent committee, but that still didn't happen until after the committee selection process had already occurred. So, at the beginning of this term, I initially asked to be moved to a lower workload committee than municipal and county government, just because I was getting kind of fed up with it there, since a lot of the municipal and county government people don't necessarily share the same priorities as me, and two, also, so I'm in a long distance relationship with a woman in New Jersey, who I have been hoping to find a way to move in with at some point or another. So, I asked to be moved to a lower workload committee just to kind of make it easier in case for me, in case I do find a job in New Jersey and manage to move down there. But unfortunately, all of the lower workload committee positions were already taken, so I wound up not having a committee position this term.
So a quick question to sort of like insert here. You explained that those committees are divided in terms of what parts of the housing issue they cover. You know, it's like you've got building standards on one side, you've got landlord rules on a different one. So like my question for that is, how does that increase the difficulty of resolving issues related to housing within the state?
Well, that's kind of why this new committee was created, was to provide a central location for it.
Is it doing a good job?
Yeah, I think having the new committee is definitely an improvement. It took over a lot of the other duties that were spread between the other committees. I know a lot of my colleagues who are still on municipal and county government don't really like it too much because they're saying, "Oh, it's stepping on our toes too much." But I mean, to be honest, that's what needs to happen. Is we need to really be getting the power over housing taken away from like the municipal level, where NIMBYs can block everything, and treat this more as the statewide crisis that it is. And I think that's what the creation of this new housing committee lets happen.
Yeah, and so just I want to like take a moment here. According to the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, excuse me. Oh geez, my thing is going kind of crazy here. So, median sale price for a single family house in the Granite State reached $540,000 in June 2024, which is a 63.3% increase from June 2020. We're also simultaneously dealing with homelessness. Number of Granite Staters experiencing homelessness increased from about 40 or to by about 49.5% from 2020 to 2024. So I guess my question is like, how does that affect the state in terms of demographics and what that means for local economies, just in general, the business?
Yeah, it's definitely something that's been having an impact. You know, a few years. So I actually first ran in 2018 for one of our confusing flotarial districts, and back then the main issue was our so-called silver tsunami, the graying of New Hampshire, of it getting older, and then between 2018 and 2020, people figure out that, okay, basically the issue, the driving force behind that is housing. So, yeah, it definitely kind of comes, yeah, it definitely has that sort of effect of causing New Hampshire to be kind of um, on in one sense a bedroom community for or and then another sense like basically a tax haven for rich people to rich people to live, to avoid taxes in Massachusetts without actually contributing anything back to their local economies. And so yeah, rich people can afford to live here, but the people who actually work to do the local jobs, such in stores and services like hospitals, can't really afford to live here as much. And I mean, you see that reflected in the composition of the legislature, where it's a lot of it is older folks who are retired and um, already have money, and landlords, and
Yeah, I think just like to take a second here, I think it's important to note that in New Hampshire, there's you guys don't really get paid any kind of meaningful amount of money to do what you do, like you do in other states. There's not like a real salary. I mean, I think it's what, like a $100 to $300 a year or something like that.
$100 a year,
Yeah.
plus mileage for people who drive. But I mean, technically, I could be claiming it too, but I don't because I walk. So, although actually, I might start claiming mileage for this next year, since the legislative office building is actually closing, and for some renovation work, the HVAC systems in it are going to get replaced, so they're moving that location out to Granite Bridge, which is a bit farther away, still within Concord, but I might have to take the bus now, which, I mean, is technically fare free here in Concord, but I think just the additional inconvenience of having to figure that out would make it reasonable for me to start claiming my mileage that that I've been foregoing until now.
Yeah, absolutely. So what, like, from your perspective, what would be a possible, or what could be possible solutions to the current housing shortage in this state?
Yeah, so I believe that we need to be building a lot more, and that to do that, we need to be taking power out of the hands of the NIMBYs, who say no to building all the time. And you heard a lot of that when I was on municipal and county government. Like, you have a lot of people who will go on about rural character and local values and aesthetics and stuff. And I think it just really takes it's going to take a lot of rewiring people's minds to realize that housing is that it's more important for people to have places to live than all of that. Like if everyone says not in my backyard, there's not going to be anywhere left. Like you've sometimes they'll say, oh well, the if we don't build the housing, we'll just have the cities like Concord and Manchester build it for us. But like we can't do that all for the state. We've really got to treat it as a statewide solution. So I think I would consider myself an urbanist. So basically densifying downtowns, improving the walkability of neighborhoods, and allowing additional infill development. Letting people build ADUs on their properties, ending parking minimums. A there's a lot of space being wasted for parking lots that could be used to actually house people in instead. I'm a pretty big opponent of car culture and supporter of public transit. If we could replace more individual cars with getting people to use public transit instead, I think that would free up a lot of additional room, a lot of additional room for housing. And just at the very local level here in Concord, we do actually have a bunch of potential places for building housing. The one I'm really looking forward to is the old Steeplegate shopping mall, which has pretty much died. The city council is still debating what exactly to do with that, because the developers who are interested in it aren't really interested in putting as much housing into it as we'd like. So we're trying to figure out how to convince them. But yeah, I think just generally, you see commercial real estate kind of went down there during the pandemic as people were introduced to work from home and realized, hey, I really like this. Why do I need to come into the office all these days? So yeah, I think converting commercial real estate to residential real estate is something that needs to be made easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the follow-up question to this is like, I work in contracting. Like this isn't doing these channels isn't my day job. I just do it because I care. My experience is that the cost to develop, to build, to like increase the housing supply is in itself prohibitive. So while I tend to see and hear and agree with the arguments that zoning reform needs to occur because of NIMBYism and it's the way that sort of protects the lack of housing stock, I guess. It seems like there's this other side of it that is related to the actual economics of constructing and like having more stock there. That it's
supplies. For instance, I talked with a few developers about this, and timber, for example, is pretty darn expensive. And these tariffs that we've been getting on, say, Canada, for instance, which historically has been one of our strongest trading partners, is definitely not helping in that regards. Yeah, I think I think we need to do more investment in providing the building materials, and like the money side of it there, is going to require funding. If you look at the state budget, the Republicans ripped out a number of important funding provisions for various housing programs in it. Like, we had just created this Housing Champions program last term that would have provided additional funding for municipalities to build housing. But we ran out of money for that this year due to lower revenues, which came due to Republicans eliminating our interest and dividends tax. So
you're saying that there had been a degree of state subsidy for new construction.
Well, there was one that was planned to be. It hadn't really had time to take effect yet. We had gone as far as creating it last term, but then this term, then.
I mean, I'm sure it got killed because socialism, right?
Yeah. I don't think they even brought up socialism. I think they just, I think it's just standard. Oh, we need to cut stuff. We can't ever pay taxes here.
Naturally,
can't ever have an income tax or any sort of progressive taxation here.
Because otherwise we'd lose our sort of like tax haven status that we have for, out of staters that are wealthy, that are looking to like sort of protect their cash.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. So I guess this sort of like opens the way to a couple other questions, right? I guess like let's sort of like inspect the situation going on right now with electricity in this state. So about a year ago, we were all sort of notified that we were going to see massive price increases in our electric bills, specifically with Eversource, but this time around it's actually hitting every single provider. And that's very directly related to the Public Utilities Commission and the fact that, according to let's see here, there's an article on indepthnewhampshire.org, actually a couple, that came out yesterday that basically said that the PUC ruled on Eversource requested increase and actually said, no, what you're doing is too low. We think you're being too generous and we should actually increase it more. So I think it was Eversource was asking for about $12 to $15, and the PUC said something more like, oh, I think it should be 19. So I guess my question here is like, how is that commission actually protecting New Hampshire consumers?
So so to be honest, this isn't exactly my area of expertise. This falls more into the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee's domain. But what I can say is, for the last recent memory, there has been a position called the New Hampshire Office of the Consumer Advocate. Donald Maurice Crease was the guy holding that position. And that was another thing that was got put on the chopping block in this latest budget. His job was entirely to advocate for the ratepayers and for lower prices and things of that nature. And yeah, Republicans decided, oh, we can't continue having that anymore. The thing is, like, this is something that Republicans in the past have agreed to having. Like, this guy was a Sununu appointee previously. So yeah, I think in the fall of 2024, we came together for a special session. I think we had combined it with Veto Day to create an emergency heating program due to the increased energy costs. And one of Republicans controlled the legislature then too, so it had to get Republican approval. And like, oh well, we're going to add all these sorts of means testing, and like make people have to explicitly apply for it to get the assistance, but we're not going to advertise it at all. So that way we won't actually end up spending too much. That was part of the reasoning they used to get passed. And the thing is, that they were right. Like, nobody heard about it, so nobody applied for it, and a lot of the money there ended up going unspent. So like the money to help bring down energy costs does exist, or at least it existed last year. But the thing is, we'd rather make it prohibitively difficult to actually get to people rather than actually put it to use.
So what's the benefit of that? Like, if I'm making that argument from their side, from the conservative side of this, like, why is that good?
Well, they would argue that saves taxpayers money. So, like, if the government isn't spending that money, then it doesn't have to tax it. But I mean, it's basically what do you want to call your payments? Like, if they're not going to be paid in taxes, they're going to be paid in rates. Like, you kind of saw this with the whole debate over Medicare for all in the 2020 primaries, where I personally, I supported Bernie Sanders, his plan for Medicare for all, because I did like how he was willing to say, yes, your taxes will go up, but it will be by a lesser amount, or they won't go up as much as your premiums and copays and all these other insurance payments will come down in response. And yeah, I think what needs to happen here is people really need to stop looking at taxation as the only the only bad sort of payment that people are forced to make. I think we need to really be looking at like a lot more of these other bills and expenses of daily living as being, just as bad. And yeah, if taxes have to go up to bring some of those other costs down, that's something that we really need to get over ourselves about looking at.
Yeah, so the argument is basically like, if we take these expenses out of a competitive market, let's say, and use the state to create a monopoly over health insurance, then we're decreasing the cost overall. So yes, you're paying it in taxes, but you're paying less dollars in taxes than you would be if you were paying for the private insurance.
Yeah, that's yeah, and of course, Republicans don't like that argument because they continue to see um, ta- only taxation as being bad. Like we have heard the whole libertarian model, taxation is theft, repeated multiple times from um, the well in the chamber of the House of Representatives, because their reasoning behind that is, the state has a monopoly on violence. They can send agents with guns after you if you don't pay your taxes. And while that's true, like that assumes that that's the only form of violence that exists. It ignores the other sorts of violence that exist if you don't make some of these other payments. Like if you don't pay your rent, um, you can get evicted. If you don't pay your heating costs, you you could freeze to death in the winter. That to me is also a form of violence, but Republicans don't see it that way. One thing, what one thing I've wanted to say from a while, if I've had the chance, is all right. Well, if taxation is theft, then rent is theft. But unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to do that yet.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that maybe getting a good round of applause from a certain subset of Democrats.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think this is like an interesting point to pivot, because we're talking about like an issue of taxation in relation to like stealing, right? And I think something that's interesting is the education voucher program that we have in the state.
Yeah.
Right now you're talking about a program that basically takes public dollars and uses them to fund private education opportunities. Now, the top 10 recipients of EFA, the voucher program, they're all Christian, like private schools, right? And actually 90%, according to Concord Monitor, 90% of those funds are going to basically subsidize Christian education. So you're taking, state taxpayer dollars and you're using it to fund private education that's religious. And it's taking the focus away from public schools, which are much more equipped to help people who are the special needs, right?
Yeah.
So how does that, how are Republicans and conservatives, libertarians squaring that circle when they talk about stealing dollars from taxpayers? Like,
Well,
right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it really has to. I think it really has to come down to the distinction between public goods and services versus private goods and services. Republicans basically have no concept of the public good, public goods and services. They see taking anything that's private and making it available to the public. They see that as theft. They don't see keeping private stuff in private hands as theft, even if it's changing from one person to another. So I mean, yeah, I of course disagree with that. I see privatization as theft. That's another response I've wanted to make to them whenever they've said taxation is theft. Is no, privatization is theft. But yeah, I mean, the weird thing is though, like that's generally the case, that they don't understand that public goods and services are a thing. They have managed to figure it out sometimes, though. Like there have been a few rare specific instances. Like you saw that, for example, with the whole gun stock privatization debate, where this was an intra-Republican Party debate in Belknap County, the Belknap County delegation, where Belknap County actually owns a municipalized ski area, the Gunstock ski resort, that some Republicans wanted to privatize, and I think they were able to see in that regards that was essentially its own attempt at theft, of stealing a public resource that was available to everyone in the county and just making it available for the benefit of a private few. So I think, but somehow they haven't managed to make the connection that that's the same sort of thing going on with a lot of these other privatization schemes, like the voucher scheme and whatever. So I mean, yeah, I think there is a path forward to getting them to realize it, but yeah, they just haven't made that connection yet.
Sure, absolutely. So I think it's important to kind of like just to kind of go back to the voucher program for a second. I do kind of want to like drill down on the fact that this is being to a fairly exceptional degree used on Christian academies. Let's see here. So Mike Kingsley from the Trinity Christian Academy said, we've been able to keep that tuition lower because the church says it's a priority. We want to make Christian education, a biblical worldview, solid academic training available to as many families as possible. I think the religious schools are probably seen as a wall, a bastion against some of these current issues that tend to be very divisive. And so the families are saying we want our students in a conservative place where they're going to be taught traditional values, see a religious school as being that. What's interesting is that when, according to the NEANH, so National Educators Association, according to the NEA, when states collect data on students who use school vouchers, those students do not report improved outcomes compared to their publicly educated peers. In fact, a study on the impact of the Indiana Choice Scholarship Program, they perform worse after participating in their state school voucher program. So that's consistent with findings in other states. So there's a certain degree of, like, when I read this stuff, my mind immediately goes to like, well, separation of church and state. Like,
yeah, and the thing is, New Hampshire, we have an article in our amendment saying no money raised by taxation shall ever be granted or applied for the use of schools or institutions of any religious sect or denomination. So, I mean, yeah, to me, this all seems pretty clearly in violation of our state constitution, and I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't been found to be as such yet.
Yeah, I mean, that just seems straight illegal.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. You know, and like, so yeah, I am a Christian myself, and the thing is, when you have these specific organizations claiming like, oh, we are going to provide a Christian education, like, well, okay, what specifically do you mean by that? Like, there is a pretty wide variety or a wide range of beliefs that all fall under the umbrella of Christianity. And like, which ones specifically do you mean by that? Like, I know a lot of evangelicals, for example, consider Catholics not to be real Christians. So, like, are evangelicals okay with Catholic schools getting that sort of money?
Right.
And like the thing is, to determine what's Christian and what's not, you have to perform some sort of doctrinal debates and the thing is, like, that's precisely why the state decided it wanted to get out of the whole business of being involved with religion in the first place, was because that sort of thing led to the whole wars of religion that you saw in Europe around the time of the Protestant Reformation. And yeah, I think I think that we could be on the road back to that sort of thing if if these sorts of programs are to continue in this vein.
Right. I mean,
to talk
so
about the evangelical
ahead.
Catholic split a bit more, for example, like, to tie this in with the immigration debate, for example, like, you've had, like, I remember our committee chair, Len Turcott, one time when he thought the cameras were off, going on this big rant about how the Catholic charities are helping with illegal immigrants and need to be crushed and all that. And, like, it's all, and then you've kind of seen that progress during this new Trump term, where, like, the Diocese of Los Angeles has granted permission that people didn't have to come to church anymore because ICE was outside of churches, and using that as a way to grab people to deport. So,
I think it's just important to note here that you're bringing up California, but we have an over 300% increase in ICE presence in New Hampshire itself. So while we're talking about a national issue, excuse me, this is very much so a state related local issue.
Yeah. And I mean, it's something, it's something that Republicans have been focused on at the state level here, too, is, denying sanctuary status, to saying schools can't be used as sanctuaries, basically passing a ban on sanctuary cities, saying all local police have to cooperate with ICE. And yeah, the thing is, we do actually have, I think it's Hanover and Lebanon have declared had declared themselves sanctuary cities. So it will it will be I think that there's just sort of a disconnect there when it comes to protecting about these Republicans, they claim to be protecting religion or with their schooling programs or whatever, but not for immigrants, though. Like, it's clearly, it's not freedom of religion for everyone. It's freedom of religion for our specific narrow set of ideas of what counts as the good and proper religion. And I think that just kind of goes against the idea of rights in general, which is that they're supposed to be for everyone.
Right. So as somebody who's like generally agnostic, right? Like I personally was raised in the UU church. So I didn't have like a full connection to any of the Abrahamic religions at all. Just on its face, like I have a hard time understanding rather how is the difference between Catholics and Protestants different than say like Shia and Sunni Muslim, right? Like those are two very opposed, sometimes violent with each other sects of Islam. And here in the US, we hear a lot of sort of fear mongering about Sharia law. But when I read articles about government money being used directly to pay for Christian education, which is not specifically delineated between like Catholic or Protestant, evangelical, what have you, it just, I don't know, there's something that doesn't sit right with me there.
I think you're right in comparing the divide between the two as being as the divide between Catholics and Protestants can be as big as the divide between Sunni and Shia Muslims. That's actually something. So there's this online game I play, Sky, the Children of the Light, that has a pretty large Middle Eastern.
Shout out to the gamers.
Yeah, shout out to the gamers out there. It has a pretty big Middle Eastern player base out there. So I've been making a bunch of Saudi friends there, and I'll sometimes ask them about their religion and what that means for practice within their country. And sometimes I'll ask them about like certain policy regarding headscarves or something, and they'll be like, "Oh, we don't do that. We're not Iran." As if they're taking offense to being considered in the same light as the other regime, since Iran's Shia and Saudi Arabia is Sunni.
Right.
Just as various denominations of Christianity consider others not to be Christians, so same thing with Sunni and Shia. Like I've had Sunni Muslims tell me, "Oh, Shias aren't actually Muslims. They don't actually worship Allah. Like they don't follow the same beliefs as us." And I just think that when it comes to a state having to decide what does and what beliefs do count as a religion and what beliefs don't count as a religion, then you're entering a very dangerous territory there. And yeah, that's the kind of place where bad things can happen. Of course, Sunni versus Shia is the biggest one in Islam, but like even within Sunni Islam, for example, like there's there's a pretty wide variety of beliefs there as well. Like and well, actually, all right, that could kind of get into a long tangent. So
no, that's fair. We don't have to go super deep into it, but like I just wanted to, it's like you said you're Christian. So I want to take that opportunity to sort of ask someone who is Christian, like, how do you reflect on this type of dynamic? I know it's easy for me as somebody who's not really involved in religion per se. I think, like, generally speaking, I identify more with Eastern religions, philosophies. So while I agree with quite a few of the teachings that exist within the Abrahamic religions, I don't ascribe to them in that way because I think they introduce a degree of authoritarianism into life that's just not really necessary and doesn't help people to engage in a degree of like self-reflection. You know, it allows way too many opportunities, from my personal view, to lay the blame elsewhere, as opposed to trying to recenter yourself and ask, like, what can I do to improve my life? How can I take ownership of my own perceptions?
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I think, yeah, I think Christianity is also pretty broad, given the wide number of, given the wide number of denominations in it. And I think it's also worth considering a number of beliefs that have been branded as heresies within Christianity as also being part of Christianity as well. A lot. The easiest ones to fall into are usually the ones regarding the Trinity and whatever, since that's like one of the most confusing topics within it. Yeah. I think. I think, though, that the tradition of separation of church and state has its roots within Christianity itself, though, since Christianity was originally developed as an alternative to the cult of Caesar during the Roman Empire. It used to be that, yeah, the Romans had a state religion that Romans had to worship, and Christianity kind of gained popularity as a way of saying, no, you don't actually, you don't have to accept the religion that's forced upon you by military might. That there's a separate, as Augustine said, there's this separate city of God from the city of man. That yeah. So I kind of disagree that Christianity is necessarily authoritarian. I think there is a pretty strong.
I don't want to like get too deep into that, and I don't want to necessarily attack Christianity as a whole, because I do think there's a lot of teachings that exist within it, and I mean, and the same for Islam and Judaism, for that matter. Like they're not necessarily inherently authoritarian. I think there's a lot of interpretations that are, but again, that's like an extension of, people seeking to use things that folks struggle with, things that they're looking for answers to, as a way to gain power over those people.
Yeah, and I think that exists in all religions, like not just Abrahamic ones. Like you see 100%. In India, for example, Modi's Hindutva movement behind him, and then even in Buddhism, like here in Concord, we have a community of Nepalis who were kicked out of Bhutan, and Bhutan's a Buddhist nation, and the Nepalis were generally Hindu. So I think a lot of it yeah, I think really like any sort of religion has the potential for authoritarianism within it, depending on like if you're a majority in a certain area or not. You know,
Yeah, absolutely. I completely follow and agree with this assessment. I think if anything, it's just more reaffirming to the notion that we need to keep religion separate from not just state but education itself, because we need
yeah,
young people to be versed in how to be literate about interrogating what occurs within religious spaces, along with a lot of other secular spaces as well.
yeah, um, yeah. I definitely, yeah, I agree. That's definitely important to maintain separation of church and state. To yeah, respect a plurality of religions, so that no single one can become a majority and become oppressive, as often happens when a religious group gains a majority.
Well, and I think another thing to point out is like we talk about like venerating immigration in the United States and how, we're a culture of immigrants. And I think part of that is having the juxtaposition of actual differing religious values having to be next to each other, having to confront what's going on in terms of those different beliefs, which can cause you to re-examine your own.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like, yeah, and I think like that the U.S. isn't actually necessarily unique in that regards in terms of being a nation of immigrants. Like, the whole well, I mean, the whole idea of borders, for example, were only really invented after the Treaty of Westphalia in the 1600s, and there have also been other nations throughout history that have considered themselves nations of immigrants. For example, like you look at Hellenistic culture, um, and they had a widespread throughout the Mediterranean, and were generally pretty open to other beliefs. Like, for example, you see in the Gospel in Acts when Paul talks about going to Greece and talking with some of their philosophers there, how they were all yeah, um, that was generally a pretty open-minded part of the um, society there at the moment. So yeah, you see some traditionalists saying like, oh, we need to go back to the days when nations stayed separate or whatever, and like that hasn't ever really been the case. For example, like Britain, for example, it was the like that that's had its own history of being conquered by the Anglo-Saxons, then the Danes, then the Normans. So yeah, I think a lot of the ethno-nationalist nostalgia for uniformity is just making up something that has never existed.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely fair and legitimate. I think like I want to kind of like try and recenter this discussion a little bit on New Hampshire itself, because I think there's like something interesting here. So people may or may not know this. I have sort of always had this like degree of interest. I think I spoke about it on a live stream like years and years ago, and I've since tried to like drill down a little bit further into it. But it's really like, obviously, I think people are, you'd have to have your head under a rock to not see what's happening in the Gaza Strip currently, and also in the West Bank, realistically, regarding the conflict or genocide, crimes against humanity occurring in Palestine by, as implemented by Israeli occupying forces, right? I think it's important to note that the U.S. is the primary enabler of this because we generally supply them with the munitions, not just offensive, but defensive munitions that help to sort of like continue to propagate this conflict, right? Now, the reason I bring this up, obviously a lot of people be like, oh, it's an international issue, it's a countrywide issue, and that's true, but it's also a local issue because one of the main sort of like industries that exists in New Hampshire is an arms industry, right? And it's not just one or two, there's like several major arms providers in New Hampshire. You're talking about L3 Harris, you're talking about BAE Systems, and you're talking about, say, Sig Sauer, right? So like, just to take those three, for example, L3 Harris and BAE are directly responsible for things like howitzer rounds and laser guided munitions, things like that like allow for precision targeting. So when you hear about like, obviously Gaza is pretty much just flattened at this point. But if you want to look back maybe a year or so ago, you'd see reports about like precision missile strikes against journalists or doctors or people who were advocating for Palestinian freedom or emancipation, what have you. They would literally be bombed out in their apartment by a precision strike executed by Israel, which Israel would deny. But it's important to note that like those munitions they're manufactured in the United States, and there's probably a very significant number of them that were manufactured here directly in New Hampshire. And so I think it's important for people to understand that there's an element to which we are directly engaging, like we as New Hampshireites are directly engaging in this international conflict. And something that always sort of like is like a bee in my bonnet is that I don't see this as an issue be talked about really at all by major outlets in the state like NHPR or Concord Monitor, like what have you. But it also doesn't get discussed by elected officials. And so I just want to give you an opportunity to sort of like weigh in on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, I think there are opportunities to draw that connection at times. There have been protests outside of Elbit Systems, for example. I believe I still am a member of our local DSA chapter here. I forgot. I'm not quite sure if I still am because I'm not sure if I'm current on my dues or not. But I remember there being involved with a protest outside of Elbit Systems over their involvement, and then like the organizers getting freaked out because some other random people then went and firebombed the place, and they were like, "Oh no, are we going to all get charged? Are we all going to get charged under RICO for since we're also protesting them?" And luckily that didn't happen. Because there were no connections. I think you mentioned Sig Sauer. I think that they do certainly get a lot of handouts from the legislature. For example, this most recent term, um, they've been facing some lawsuits over some of their guns misfiring, um, and the House Republicans passed a bill specifically to shield them from immunity from lawsuits that they might face over that happening at all. Yeah, so I think they're there definitely are a lot of local politicians who are pretty strong supporters of our arms manufacturers.
And I mean, that makes sense, though, right? Because it's providing jobs for New Hampshireites, right? And you're talking about jobs that are like, on the low end, you're looking like 30, 40K a year, which for a lot of people is like, oh, that's a really good job. Now, like, that doesn't mean you're paying less than 30% of your annual income on your housing, right? Like,
yeah.
So it's not, good is all relative. But that provides a degree of insulation for politicians when doing this, to sort of like shove your head in the sand about like the implications of the actual industry itself, because like it's maintaining a certain type of economy or a certain quality of life for your constituents.
Yeah. And I mean, it really is tied in with everything, I tried getting involved with, I tried getting involved with the robotics team at my high school, my freshman year of high school. And, the first robotics program that Dean Kamen started, where teams build robots to compete with each other in a slightly different task that's decided every year. And one of the major sponsors of that is BAE Systems. Like, if you are a STEM kid in New Hampshire, chances are BAE will be looking out to recruit you once you graduate from high school. Like, it's pretty hard to ignore, and I think we're going to have to come up with some other sort of outlet to send STEM kids into, if we're going to end the arms industry's grip on our local economy. And I think that the whole green job sector can kind of provide a way or an outlet for that. There's been a lot of progress in the whole technology of renewables lately.
Well, the other thing I want to sort of like ask about, and I mean, like, I don't necessarily, I don't want to give the impression that I just know what I'm talking about here. Because at the end of the day, like, I'm a contractor, like I'm still kind of stupid sometimes, like that just happens. But from my perspective, it's like we have this really incredible weapons industry, and we rely so much on Asian countries, specifically China, for things like microprocessors. So we don't have that capacity for manufacturing here in the United States. And we talk about how we want to sort of like bring home a lot of these industries. And there's a part of my brain that goes like, well, why can't we just repurpose this weapons industry to focus more on producing things like microprocessors, stuff that would actually help us to have the industries that would back up using something like tariffs as a means to encourage a better position of trade?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it is possible. You saw after World War II, for example, like we had, or well, during World War II, we had militarized a bunch of our factories to be making military equipment. And then afterwards, we had to convert them back to peacetime uses again. So, yeah, I think converting factories between what they make is definitely something that we've done before and can do again. As far as policies go, I think the CHIPS Act that was passed during the Biden administration, that was kind of meant to address some of the whole issues you were bringing up about microprocessors being built in China or whatever. But it kind of remains to be seen what exactly the fate of that will be,
Right.
with the change in administrations, whether the current administration seems to be bent on just overturning everything that happened during the Biden administration. So, I'm not really too what's the word? Too hopeful about the future of what the CHIPS Act can accomplish at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are kind of in that position just because we're in a more of a wrecking ball state right now.
Especially with I see it's getting to be about 11:30 now.
Yeah, sure. I don't want to hold you too much longer, but thank you so much, Eric.
Thanks for having me